You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A Radiant Creator isn't making a living, they are living.
Fiona Aedgar, welcome to Radiant Creators. It's great to have you back on again. It's always nice to have guests that we've had on again because it's just an easy conversation then. It's like two friends hanging out and catching up. So, how are things going over there?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. It's really nice to be back again. Things are okay. There's this sense of, people are scared and in fear of this coronavirus thing. It's just this anticipation that everyone's feeling, but I think it's the same everywhere. Hopefully, I think it's hopefully going to blow over after the retrograde ends, because this whole thing has been so typical of a Mercury retrograde in Pisces. Pisces rules over viruses and diseases because if you think Pisces struggles with boundaries, the planet Neptune has no boundaries. So this is very typical. And also we have the confusion. No one knows what it is, where it started, where it came from. So I'm hoping it will blow over. I hope so.
Yeah, you mentioned Mercury retrograde, and sometimes Mercury retrograde can go by, and you as an astrologer are paying more attention, but sometimes a person who's aware of Mercury retrograde, aware of astrology to some extent, will just realize, oh wow, a Mercury retrograde went by, I didn't even notice. That can happen. But this time, of course, I knew it was coming, and wow, this one has been particularly rocky for me, at least. Definitely felt the transit in, and I'm aware that we're in it. So it seems like this might be a bit of a globally strong Mercury retrograde. Would you say this one has a bit of teeth to it, especially, yes, with the coronavirus? And you did do a recording on that you put on Facebook where people can learn more about that, about the coronavirus from an astrological perspective. But yeah, would you say that this Mercury retrograde is particularly interesting?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Well, it's all started at the start of the year there. We had the Saturn and Pluto conjunction. So when that happened, astrologers knew that something big was coming, because when those two planets get together, it's never just going to be a small thing. So that was really, I think that was in December, and that's when they first became aware of the virus. But the thing is, with Saturn and Pluto coming together, it's all about fear being used as a weapon. Fear being used so the powers that be can control us more. It may have been an experiment. I'm not sure. Some people are saying it was a biological weapon. I don't know. It's Neptune. No one ever knows what the hell is going on when Neptune is involved. So even just without the virus stuff, yes, this Mercury retrograde has been tough emotionally, I think, because it's a water sign. I just, I have been feeling off. I can't explain it. My dreams have been weird. Neptune and Pisces are connected to dreams, and Pisces very much affects our energy levels. So Mercury retrograde, if any planet is in retrograde, it has the potential to make things feel very slow. And I just think it's like we've been walking through a swamp or walking through just this thick, heavy energy. So I'm hoping that it does pass soon. Mercury goes direct on the 10th, and then we do have the shadow period after that. But after that, I really hope that things pick up again.
I think so for sure. And I think you mentioned in your recording you did about the coronavirus, the astrology of it, was that you didn't put so much weight on the shadow period. Because I know myself, if I took the shadow periods into account, I know they exist, but if I really took those into account, like half the year would be in retrograde. You know what I mean? So I kind of go, when you station retrograde, then that's when it starts. And once you go the right direction, that's when it ends. That's always been where it really exists for me, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the shadow periods, it's supposed to be 2 weeks, like before and after. Personally, I only ever feel something for about a week, like a week before it goes retrograde and then a week after it ends. The energy can just become a bit wonky because Mercury is stationing and, like maybe your electronics are fried or you're feeling fried. But really, yes, you're absolutely right. We cannot put our lives on hold for like 5 weeks, 3 times a year. It's just not possible. So the best way to get through a retrograde is to be prepared, find out what it's going to do before it goes retrograde, what sign is it going to be in, what planets are being affected, and then it's always a good idea to check your personal chart because if it makes a square or a conjunction or any aspect to your personal chart, you will feel it.
And that's important, what you're mentioning there. And I would definitely recommend that if someone's interested in astrology, interested in knowing more about their chart, uh, or if they're already familiar and they want to just know even more, definitely Fiona does charts for people. You can do them text only, or you can do on via Skype, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And you know, here at Radiant Creators Central, we've had charts done with Fiona, and we know other people who have. And there are astrologers that are okay, and there's astrologers that are really great. Where it seems like most astrologers are either okay or they're really good. And so Fiona is one of the really good ones, where you get something from it that you just would not have expected. You get insight that is real, and then also throughout the year, if a person does get their yearly reading or every 6 months or whatever, it really is good to know what, let's say, Mercury retrograde is going to do that year for you. Because, yeah, there's Mercury retrograde, and we all know, okay, it happens, and, my computer stops working, and it's hard to get a hold of people. We know stuff like that happens. I get a flat tire, that kind of thing happens. But really, where it is in an individual's chart and how it affects them specifically, that is an incredible knowledge to have, because since Mercury retrograde is a pain in the ass anyway, you might as well get the most you can out of it and know how it's affecting you, and then how you individually can work on that during the process.
Yeah, I mean, there's always an upside. There's always an upside. Like Mercury retrograde has become this huge thing that people who don't normally pay any attention to astrology are panicking. And, I even saw it on a TV advertisement over here, and it's like the new buzz word or the new buzz phrase. Um, it doesn't happen for no reason. It happens because there's a part of our life that needs to be reviewed or needs to be improved upon. So it's an opportunity. I like to see it as an opportunity. I mean, this Mercury retrograde, it has been bad, but and very difficult at times, but it's been really good for creativity and creative projects. Mercury in Pisces is really good for creating artwork, writing, anything to do with making films or photography. So if you know that beforehand, you can say, okay, well, maybe I'll have car issues or maybe I'll have relationship issues, but I can channel all of this energy into something really positive.
Because one of the forgotten aspects of Mercury retrograde, I think, is that Mercury also pays you back for work you put into things. I've always found it to be the case where, yes, it creates difficulty, but I've oftentimes found, and I do believe this is correct. I'll ask you if I'm right on this one, but Mercury also does pay you back. It's kind of a time where you get rewarded also during this difficult time.
Yes, yeah, that's you're absolutely right. So when any of the planets are retrograde, it is a time of karma. So it can be, yes, you kind of something really good happens to you. I mean, for example, during this retrograde, I have had a breakthrough in terms of my health. Um, I've made progress in that area. So my Neptune in my birth chart sits in the part of my chart that rules my health. So it's not always a bad thing. And yeah, you do get rewards at times. Um, but yeah, like Mercury and any of the planets going retrograde can be a time of karma.
Yeah, and I think it's always nice to uh, expect that to some extent. If our expectation can help create our reality, which I think it can, if you say, "All right, Mercury, I know how you're going to affect me during this retrograde, and I'll work on that. I get it, but I want some payback too. All right, I've been good, and I've been working on my stuff. So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so we'll both show up for this, okay, Mercury? How about that? I'll meet you in the middle. So. Well, uh, Thomas Sheridan, who we both do follow, I believe,
Yeah.
a very jolly character over there in your side of the world. He does something called his psychic weather reports. So I'll definitely give him, credit for that term, psychic weather. I think I love his little reports because he looks a little deeper into events that are going on right now. And I know you are definitely an intuitive, so I'd ask, how do you feel? Or is there anything you're picking up in the psychic weather right now? What kind of things do you think are influencing humanity? What's happening psychically out there? I mean, there's so much energy right now. So, what are some things maybe you're picking up on out there?
Yeah. Yeah. Thomas is a cool guy. He really is a top guy, and his reports are really useful. I have been feeling a bit of kind of dark energy around the past few weeks. So I'm not sure where it's coming from, like, if it's like chemtrails or, but on an energetic level, I have kind of felt very, very sluggish and, just not feeling my best. So I think that if we look at the elite, they are very aware of astrology and they use astrology, and that's why they tried to make astrology into this big joke, like sun sign astrology and sun sign horoscopes, but they still use it. All of the top people still use astrology, and they have astrologers, so they are aware of when is going to be the best time for them to unleash something or do something. So you can bet that they're taking advantage of the retrograde as we speak.
Mm.
Oh, and you're gone.
Sorry about that. I'm actually here.
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry, that happens. I pushed the wrong.
I,
I pushed
I
the
thought
wrong.
I thought someone was closing you down because they didn't like what I just said.
Oh yeah, like oh yeah, yeah. Sometimes they push that button. You have to reconnect. Well, it just means knows that you're on. You know you're on to something when that happens. But no, that one technically I think was just Mercury and me not pushing the button. you know. So, but. No, especially like with what you're saying, the influence of Pisces during this retrograde, and that being about you're mentioning viruses and what was it? Virus and I froze up there. So yeah, Mercury being in Pisces and being retrograde right now, you mentioned that does affect viruses and what else?
Yeah, viruses and diseases.
Viruses and
So,
diseases.
yeah, so that actually Neptune is in Pisces and will continue to be there for another 5 years. We're seeing, I mean, since Neptune entered Pisces, we've been seeing this increase in these strange diseases that the medical establishment either refuse to acknowledge, that they exist, or they just don't treat them properly, like Lyme disease, Bartonella, all of the Lyme co-diseases. That's becoming a huge problem. There are so many people that are suffering from that. Over here, the medical treatment is like completely useless. I don't even think that they acknowledge that such a thing as chronic Lyme actually exists. So over in the States, it's a bit better, and you can get a doctor that's experienced with Lyme. But so many people are being gaslighted, and that's really Neptunian. Oh, it's just your mind. Here, have these antidepressants. So like that's going to get a bit worse over the next few years, I feel, and then maybe we'll have a breakthrough when Neptune goes into Aries.
Mm. Well, Neptune and Aries would definitely be hotter, as you could say, because yeah, Neptune being, I mean, that being like Poseidon. I mean, that being the Neptune is oftentimes where our well, how do I define it? Well, Neptune and Pisces, I mean, to me, they have a lot in common energy wise. So, gosh, when you have Neptune in Pisces, that is quite the stirring of the depths, and especially delusion. And I think that could also be a time when people who have a propensity for addiction, it seems like they could be affected too.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, Neptune does rule over addictions, so we are seeing a lot of people that are addicted to pharmaceuticals,
Mm.
which just, no one really talks about and it gets glossed over. There are a lot of deaths connected to pharmaceuticals, so all of that is very Neptunian.
And then when did Neptune enter Pisces?
Gosh, I can't remember the exact year. But it's been there for quite some time
Okay,
now.
so it's been there for a couple of years, and then it goes into Aries. You mentioned it was like 5 years from now.
Yeah, yep,
Okay,
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
Well, that's something. Yeah, I forget how long it takes Neptune to go through a house, but so if it's been there for a while and then it's leaving and moving into Aries, well, that would kind of not. I can imagine Neptune and Aries would be quite good partners, I guess.
Yeah,
I'd rather see Neptune in Aries just because Aries is tougher, where you've got Pisces, which is kind of a doormat.
yeah. Well, Neptune actually is the ruler of Pisces, so
Really? Okay.
it's at home there. So we see the best and the worst.
The best and the
So
worst.
yeah, I mean Neptune spends about 14 years in a sign. It takes 14 years to transit through one sign. So I mean, if you look back over the last 10 years, things to do with addictions that has become much worse, and then the disease things that we talked about, viruses. But Neptune rules over creativity, spirituality. A lot of people are rediscovering spirituality as opposed to religion. I know
Mm.
that it's very true over here. There's been a massive return to paganism. I think it's true over in the States as well.
Oh, I would say so. Um, well, one of the things about like 14 years Neptune being in Pisces and it being the best and the worst, um, of course, we do see medical breakthroughs right now, but we also see a lot of strange things like transhumanism, and you've got a lot of I'm just going to say the elite, as in people who have a lot of money and not a lot of moral backbone. I mean, I'm fine if a person's wealthy, but just when I say the elite, I mean the just the nasty ones. They want to be frozen. They want to have like their mind downloaded, and all this kind of stuff. So we're seeing this. I think transhumanism to me is something which we've seen in the last 10 years. I mean, that definitely could be a Neptune and Pisces energy. I would say transhumanism. I want to be a machine. I want to have my consciousness downloaded, and I want to be. That to me is weird. It ultimately is. Uh, you could call it a disease. It's something that seems to fit into that, but at the same time, we're seeing like here in the States for sure we're seeing it is just the horrific opioid crisis. We're seeing both things that people take that are legal. You could say like OxyContin, Percocet, these things people get their hands on. And they never stop doing them. It's horrible. But then also you just see that I mean, I say it compassionately, but we call them like meth heads and crack heads. I mean, it's very hard to go to like a Walmart and get through the parking lot without having some strange person thinking that like your car is theirs. So really, we are kind of at, I feel like, a tipping point here, at least in the States, where legal and illegal drug addiction and people just being out of their minds is really coming to a kind of a volcanic eruption. Really, it's getting to the point where society can't ignore it, and it seems like society is not so much just Some are, but I think more are not just looking at the surface level. They're looking at, like, let's go deeper. Why are people addicted to these horrible things? And then, who pushed that? Like, let's not just make it all the victim's fault. Let's look at a bigger picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think the problem comes from that people have these health issues and the doctors can't help them. They're not able to help them with pharmaceutical drugs. And natural medicine, they just completely, don't recommend that and they don't want you to use that. So someone goes to the doctor and they have pain, and the only thing that that doctor has to offer them are these really addictive, strong drugs. And that's basically how it all starts. It's really sad because, I'm someone that's had health issues all my life. I have autoimmune issues. And I've never had any amount of decent help from doctors or the medical establishment. It's all been through my diet and through herbal medicine, but they just totally, they make it really difficult now for people to get herbal medicine. They put all of these restrictions. The European Union was trying to ban plants that have been used for thousands of years. It's just crazy. They just don't want them to be used because the pharmaceutical industry is they make so much money and they have way too much control.
And they do seem to control what doctors can even say, from what I've seen, because a lot of doctors, I believe I would say most, they wanted to help people when they got involved. But then they find that, well, wait a second, here's your toolbox, which is regulated completely. And here's what you can say, and you can't say anything else. So if somebody's in pain, like when it comes to keeping their insurance and their license and all this stuff, you can prescribe these things, but outside of that, you cannot. So really, doctors I think they're in a hard spot because they either play the game or they won't be doctors anymore. I'm not sure if people always realize how regulated, like quite literally, everything a doctor can do and say and even suggest in any way is completely regulated from what I understand.
Yeah, it is hard because they do genuinely want to help people, but then they're unable to. I remember growing up I grew up in the 80s. My mother's doctor used to offer homeopathy, and they would never be allowed to do that now.
Yeah, times are changing. Well, something that you mentioned was how people over and you're in Ireland, of course, right? And so
Yeah.
over there is a resurgence of paganism, which is that can mean a lot. But I would ask, you know, psychic weatherwise, which is basically how what you intuit and what you see. And of course, since I think both of us, well, many people that we know, our tribe, are always kind of looking at the news, kind of looking at what's going on in the world, but we see it a little differently. It's not so much just the headline; it's what's behind it. So, how do you feel about this resurgence of paganism? Because, like, how would you define that, and how are you seeing it? Because yes, this is happening, but I think you might actually see it more clearly than I do, for sure.
Yeah, well, I think that people are missing something. They feel like they're missing something spiritually, and Christianity is kind of dying a death now. That no one's going to church anymore. It's mostly like fairly older people that are going to church. And coming from Ireland, a lot of our history has been really destroyed, covered up. Like the Vikings settled here, the Norse, most of us have Norse ancestry. It's so obvious if you go to Ireland and then you go to somewhere like Sweden, like you can really see that the people are so similar. But we have that in our backgrounds, in our heritage, this Celtic and Norse paganism. And when I was at school, I barely learned anything about that part of history. It was all like St. Patrick and then like all of the kind of more modern stuff like the war. I never learned that half of the place names in Ireland are, have Norse origins. My mother's maiden name is of Norse origin. My marital name is of Norse. No one ever told us that. So when you get older and you start to kind of do some research, and then you discover that, Odin and Thor, there's just something that resonates so strongly within you, and it's just like something is being reconnected that was lost.
And it does seem that there's a real spiritual battle going on right now. Maybe that's part of the awakening, because something that I see is that, like here in this country, I look at the demons of socialism, I will call them, have been awoken. And that's what I would call them, basically. Like Stalin and Lenin's ghost, basically. And we kind of have this neo-Bolshevism, is what I would call it, happening in this country. And, you've got Bernie, that old nut, running for president and such, and a man who's been too lazy his entire life to comb his hair or stand up straight. I mean, for the most part. So we have this frightening energy that I feel has been awoken, but at the same time, I'm feeling in the American people there's a really tough sovereign being. It's almost like there's been something else is waking up in this country too to meet it, and it seems like we really are in the midst of spiritual warfare is where it's really happening. It's almost like what is good and what is evil, and to me it does exist. But of course, I think you've got like the neo-Bolshevik side, like the demons of socialism, which they don't have those concepts of right and wrong and things like that. And so it seems like there's like spiritually the country is breaking in half, or maybe breaking like it's only one quarter versus three quarters, but whatever. But there's this evolutionary direction change where some people are just degenerating back into, I don't know. I mean, they're I don't know, praying to the demons of Stalin and stuff. Then you have those who they're kind of thinking about like a new earth, you might say. They really are. They're like, okay, I'm beginning to understand my history. I understand what's going on. It's like there's something, like, how do you pick up on that? There is something, I think, magical happening here in the States, but I think possibly in the world too. Maybe America's leading that, I'm not sure, but it does seem that these old demons have been awoken, but like you say, maybe that like neo-pagan has been awoken also.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. We are seeing that over here as well. I mean, there's this like terrifying. I personally find it terrifying that all of these, and they mostly are millennials, I think, have started to become, to see communism and socialism as the solution. That what they haven't. I don't know if they're not teaching this stuff in school anymore or whatever, but it's really scary. And the whole gender thing where they don't identify as one or the other. I mean, it's totally crazy. But yeah, I think that I do see though that people want to go back to the roots. And I did say I made this prediction just before Saturn went into Capricorn that people would get fed up of this crazy Looney Tunes world that we live in where you can't say she or he, and you offend people by assuming their gender and all of that nonsense. People are tired of that. We saw that in the results of the last British election. Boris Johnson is now PM, and the people voted for him simply because, well, he's not a communist for starters. But it was really positive to see that. It gave a lot of us hope because the 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 snowflakes are still in the minority. They are the ones that shout the loudest and have tantrums. They write all over social media and they're so dramatic, but really they are still in the minority. So I hope that it continues to stay that way. But a lot of young people, a lot of millennials are turning their backs on that as well. And they're more interested in a traditional lifestyle, having kids, getting married, growing their own vegetables and returning to paganism. And it's really encouraging to see that.
Yeah, here in the States, we have something we call TDI, which is like Trump derangement syndrome. And I think that it's unfortunately not a perfect term because it's not really about Trump per se. It's that we have a situation here where you do have like your neo-Bolshevik, as I call them, your kind of new socialist, or you can call it like the democratic socialists, like they call it here, and they're very anti-life ultimately. So if it brings life, if it supports a good life, if it supports personal power, they find it to be tremendously offensive. And I look at that and think that is a lot of programming. That a lot has gone into this because it just seems like the world has been turned upside down. Like what brings life to them is what brings death. It's almost like good and evil have literally been switched within their being.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And the United States is going to go through its Pluto return in a couple of years, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens there because we're already seeing this polarization. There's no middle ground anymore. You're either one or the other. You're either with us or against us. So, that's gonna the power. Pluto is all about power. So when a country experiences a Pluto return, it's only ever going to be a country that experiences that because Pluto takes 240 years to make to go around the zodiac wheel. Um, the rebalancing of power is going to occur, but it may be a bit shaky. There may be some uprisings and things like that to deal with.
Yeah, 240 years. That would make sense actually. Historically, that's a time when a lot of empires fall apart. 250 years, and then also there's like a 1,000 year mark where they fall apart and such. I mean, historically, the 250 year mark or so around there, it always varies a bit, but that definitely is a time when empires fall. And I know people do a lot of conjecture, but like along with what you're saying here in the States, where we are seeing states more and more want to break apart, or one half of a state join another half of a state and such like that. And I think that America is in the midst of a spiritual revolution, and I think that ultimately I do think it's possible, although I know some shake their head and say it absolutely is not. I think that we could be headed for a peaceful revolution where the country sort of reorganizes itself. But I don't see it possible that it stays the same as far as structure. Like I think, how do you feel about this over on your side of the world? Because I would say we have here, of course, the separation of church and state, which I would say most people, for the sake of argument, thinks a good idea, probably. But it also seems like now we're getting into a new era where we need kind of a separation between city and state. You know what I mean? Because like the cities tend to be ruled by the neo-Bolsheviks. I guess you could say like the socialists kind of exist in the cities, but the rest of a country or the rest of a state, it it doesn't happen there. And it seems that somehow like here in America, we've got to have an evolution where cities can have their sovereignties and states can have their sovereignties rather than cities control the states.
Yeah. So it is. Well, I come from Northern Ireland, and quite honestly, it's still quite backwards. I mean, they're very much Christianity still very much dominates. A lot of our daily lives here, like it's we have limited hours that we can go shopping on a Sunday, and that's our own fault because they keep voting these kind of dinosaurs in that um they're just kind of Christian dinosaurs. And I think that's I don't know what's happening over there. Like this is something that I don't really hear a lot about in terms of the US. But at the moment in Europe, they're really trying to pump all of these refugees into our countries, and it's kind of terrifying because it's not about racism or anything like that, but they're trying to make Islam the dominant religion because they know that Christianity is dying. And quite honestly, it's a slave religion. So they're bringing this other slave religion in to replace Christianity with. And it's scary to think about because, like you say, we could be coming into this more enlightened age. People are trying to shake off that control and oppression. I mean, people don't have any freedom under these religions. So it's just terrifying to think that we could potentially go back into the dark ages through the vote. It's not going to be done through the sword. It's going to be done when the majority of people are Muslims, and it's terrifying to me.
Oh no, I understand. I understand, and that's the thing. I wonder about. Well, not wonder. I mean, I guess I maybe almost have a hypothesis. I guess you could say when I look at immigration has become, or you should say mass immigration, or you could say planned immigration by globalists. Basically, globalist planned invasion that is designed to destroy ancient cultures and such like that, obviously, and destroy. I mean, yeah, and of course, it's when people say these things, oftentimes it will sound horrible to some people, but no, Ireland has a very good right to continue being Ireland, and it's a every border. I think, especially the older it is, every land does have a racial concept. You know what I mean? Most people who live there look like you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so that didn't just happen. That's an evolution over time. And I think that we're not just individuals living on a planet. We are the planet. And so in a sense, we are the land that we are born. It's in our bone marrow. And I think as those generations and generations happen, you are the land that you were born. And so in a sense, that's all it really is. And I think these things are natural. It's just a natural thing. And with that said, I question when I see how Turkey has kind of let refugees, as they would call them, I'm not sure exactly what they call them, go through Turkey into, oh gosh, what is it?
Greece.
Greece, yes. And bless those that are suffering and they're trying to escape it. But it doesn't seem to me like that's really what is happening at all, because I was watching people go across that water body from like Turkey into Greece, and I forget what sea that is called. But I'm watching and I'm like, wait a second, these are expensive boats.
Yeah.
I'm like, these are the kind that have the tubes. I forget what they call their. I forget the particular term. But I was looking. Wait a second. Where'd they get all these $60,000 boats? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it isn't just one. No, they have a lot. This looks like D-Day footage when the Americans were going into France. You know what I mean? I'm like, wait a second. Somebody is putting a lot of money. What, these people who are supposedly refugees, who are down on luck, who are trying to escape death, what, did they get to the other shore and go, oh, we want to get over there. Let's go over to the boat dealership and let's all go buy like 100 of the same boat that cost $60,000 a piece. What? You know what I mean? Somebody is funding that invasion.
Yeah, it's probably George Soros. I'm sure he had a hand in it. He's usually behind stuff like that. But yeah, I don't know. It's just so awful. I feel for them because, when in Syria, their country has been torn apart. Thanks Obama. And like anyone would want to escape that, but it's not the way. Like they need to stay and to rebuild what has been taken from them. But it is an invasion, and as a European and being Irish, my history, my pagan history, has been erased. The pagan myths that survived were rewritten by Christian monks. Like it's so sad. So potentially we could be looking at that again. And Islam, I mean, they look what they've done in Iraq. They've torn down thousands of, they've torn down structures that are thousands of years old and destroyed all of this archaeological buildings and artwork. So it's just you can see their agenda, but their weapon is to use these white liberals against us and make people too scared to speak up because they're going to be called racist.
Yeah, exactly. It is quite the manipulation that's going on right now. So yeah, so there is this spiritual war going on. I think that and I think what's natural would be to be going back to a more pagan spirituality, because as a guy named Neil Kramer, quite the modern day philosopher, he said that when it comes to people that are churchgoers, your typical Christian individual, he was saying how it's surprising how most are not spiritual. And they would actually even admit it. You know what I mean? Like, they're not, but they are communal. They love the community, but they're not spiritual at their core. And most would admit that. Do you really believe in this? Do you, what do you think? And they would say, well, no, this is just kind of how our community works. We're Catholic or whatever, and that gives us a church to go to and community support. And, well, it's supposed to make you a better person, so I do it. And you say, but do you believe? Is it in your bone marrow? Do you know? And surprisingly, most will say, no, I don't. I'm just here for the community. I'm here for the yard sales.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm here for the church bake sale and to make sure that my kids are around at least somewhat quality individuals as they grow up and things like that. But most are not spiritual. And so that's the big difference between like that mentality, that life, which is okay. I'm not knocking it or praising it, but I think that's what it is, and I think that's a pretty accurate assumption, a definition. But the going back to a more pagan ideal, a bit more pagan life. Now that at its core is spiritual, and it's also connected to the land, especially the land of your ancestry.
Yes, yes. It's very much connected to the land of our ancestry. And when you do go and do some research and then, you start to get involved with your native spirituality, I cannot tell you how empowering it is. It's been very strengthening for me. I mean, Christianity, the God is a desert God from the Middle East. It has literally nothing to do with this land, and the conversion didn't happen by, it wasn't done willingly for the most part. It was done by the sword. The pagans were slaughtered. But I would encourage anyone who's interested in paganism and wants to kind of get back to their roots, any Europeans, to check out the Alsa through Folk Assembly. Those guys are doing some really good work, and they have a large community. And I think you're right in that a lot of people, they spend time with their church and they're part of groups and associations because it gives them that sense of community that they don't get anywhere else.
Yeah, and you mentioned Alsa True, so I'll link to that in the show notes. If you can, like, send me their website or something like
Sure.
that, and we'll make sure that we get that out there. Well, yeah. So there is a, it's funny, and then people coming to their roots too. Since I'm American and I'm over here in America, I kind of speak from this perspective, because it's where I'm at. But I think something that we're seeing here is a bit of a resurgence of real knowledge of our history. A lot is going on over here. I think that, for one thing, a huge one that's affecting, I think, this country is cryptocurrency. Crypto, basically Bitcoin. It's not so much whether a person is into cryptocurrencies or not, or into Bitcoin. I mean, let's just say there's many, but let's just say Bitcoin is the one. It's the big standard, Bitcoin. A lot of people are getting into, well, wait a second, why did we go off the gold standard in 1971 here in this country? Supposedly it was for our benefit. But if you look at the charts, the dollar has lost pretty much all of its value since then. It's worthless now. And we're told that, like, cryptocurrency, Bitcoin has no value because it's based on nothing. Well, the American currency has been based on nothing since 1971, And as our president back then put it, pretty much he goes, well, let's just base our currency on a preponderance and a monopoly of violence, and we'll threaten the world into making it the standard. Well, that's some serious karma.
Yes.
That's not going to work forever. And that's starting to change. The world is changing. And I think that here in the States, there are a lot of people who are realizing, wait a second, you mean, wow, you mean my currency has no value? We've got, it's funny, but there's a lot of waking up. And I think there's a lot of waking up to how we've been manipulated by the central banks and this and that, and how more and more people, especially like the millennial generation, one thing they're going through is, well, they can't retire like their parents did because that option is now gone. It doesn't exist in this country anymore. Where their parents, since the currency still had some value, you could save throughout your lifetime and then retire. But for them, the currency is devaluing too quickly. You might as well spend it today because it'll be less tomorrow. There's no future for you, millennial. Sorry. I'm not trying to be a downer, but that's just the truth,
Yeah.
And so things are changing, and we're looking back at our country, and I think I think a lot of people are beginning to study like World War II, for instance, and what was that really about, and what are some of the things that happened, and how did our country change course during and after that? And there's just a tremendous amount of people who are just going, wait a second, like we can talk about like paganism. Yes, there's a resurgence, but also it seems like there's also an emergence of people realizing, wait a second, the world that I live in, the truth is going to destroy it, and I think the truth is here.
Yeah.
Is that happening over there too?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's very hard. It's hard to have a family. It's hard to buy a home. Then when you do buy the home, you spend the rest of your life paying for it. And then when you die, the government want to tax you on it before you leave it to your kids. Or if they put you in if you get put in a home, they'll just take all of the money. They'll take your home and sell it. So it's really hard to do things the way, the life that our parents had, or our grandparents. It just doesn't exist anymore. They sold us this dream of feminism, where women are supposedly more free sitting at a desk for 40 hours a week and being someone's slave than, raising their kids and being at home with them. But now, like, both parents have to be working. For the average person, they both have to be working in order to, so the kids, they don't get brought up at home, they get put in a nursery. Something has to change, and I think you're right that more people are waking up. More people, even if they're not interested in, astrology, and they don't listen to podcasts like this, they watch the news, they know that something is wrong. They know that something is very, very wrong, and that it can't go on like this.
Yeah, and it's fun to be in the place that we're at. Our little like Radiant Creators audience is that they're not just waking up to this. Like for some people, this just happened. Yeah. It's like, oh, wait a second. Like they're texting their friends, hey, guess what? I just realized something, It's like, no. So it's nice not to be in that place,
Yes, yes. Yeah. That could be a lonely place. That can be a really lonely place, because, well, I remember when I first started waking up, and it was really, it was about 2004, 2003. When everyone just started to have internet in their homes, and you suddenly had access to all of this information that you never had access to before. And people around me thought that I was nuts, so I just didn't talk about it. I remember watching some documentaries on 9/11 conspiracies and extraterrestrials being hidden by the military and things like that. But it's good to know that there are other people out there like you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and there's a lot of us out there, and that's the nice thing. I mean, ultimately, loneliness is, and this is something that I know Kramer recently talked about on his last kind of seminar he did at Omega Institute over there in New York. He talked about loneliness, like it's essential. You know what I mean? Like that loneliness on that path of wisdom, ultimately that you start. If you look back at life and you look at that loneliness, you kind of want to you kind of reach back to that person who was lonely, who felt so alone, and just kind of almost like reach out and say, well, for one thing, it gets better, okay? Like, it gets better, but also savor this, because, man, what's going on now is amazing. You're going to love the way this turns out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's always good to. That's why the internet is such a useful tool for people that are awakening up, is that you can reach out and find people that are on the same wavelength, because it can be very isolating. I know living in Ireland, I'm an astrologer, and like people think that I'm like some kind of, devil cat trying to bewitch their husbands. But yeah, it can be lonely. It's always good to find other people that have the same interests and share ideas, like we're doing now.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And that, how do I put it? Do you think, now I know this is kind of maybe an obvious question, but I would say, do you think we are in the age of Aquarius? Because I've oftentimes thought that, I think it was, 1974, I forget what year it was, but the first nuclear explosion, to me often, I often kind of thought the first nuclear test was the beginning, like was definitely part of that transit into the age of Aquarius, because that's very Aquarian. Let's have a nuclear explosion, boom, this massive release of energy. May not be very healthy for the planet, but that's kind of Aquarius to me showing up. But regardless of whether that's when it started or not, this world that we're living in, definitely with the internet, with this type of communication that we're doing right now, I mean, this to me really signifies we are entering that age of Aquarius.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I don't think that we have up, maybe we're on the edge of it right now, but and it's funny that you mentioned that, because a couple of big planets, I call the outer planets the big planets, because they're the most potent and they have the most impact in the world around us. Well, Saturn is actually entering Aquarius in March for a brief while before it goes retrograde and then goes back into Capricorn. But then it will go into Aquarius for good in December. And that's going to be a real shift in energy. And I think that it's an encouraging sign, first of all, that we are going to be maybe making progress in terms of like the refugee crisis and these issues with boundaries. I'm really big on boundaries. I think it's really healthy. And I think that if we want to see changes in the world, that we have to, on a more personal level, start with ourselves. Because whatever way that we live our lives every day is going to reflect in the world around us. So maybe things like the coronavirus or whatever virus is going to be next can teach people to have better boundaries. Because a virus has no boundaries. So if we kind of practice being more scrupulous with the way that we live our lives, and just having tighter boundaries with who we allow into our lives, that we'll see it reflected in the world. And then Pluto goes into Aquarius, not for another couple of years, but that's going to be really big. Honestly, I do expect things to get a bit wacky, like before we reach the good stuff and before we are able to live in harmony with each other. I think it's going to get a bit sci-fi. Let's hope it's not too bad. But I think after about 5 years, maybe 5, 6 years from now, we're going to be seeing more of the positive side of the age of Aquarius.
And one thing about everyone living in harmony, I think definitely what's important is, like you're saying, live in harmony with ourselves, because it's something that I think Rudolf Steiner talked about it, and many have really, that there is like a new earth, and to some extent, if there is an evolutionary progression for humanity, well, you can do it now. You know what I mean? You can. That really is like the wisdom path. That really is the spiritual path. Is that you personally within that powerful self-awareness, and you cultivate that and your ability to create an easy life for yourself because you can manifest, and you have your nice, you make your little, nice house, nice life, and you can have a nice little spot to meditate, and you have your alpacas in the backyard. You make life the way you really, really want it, and from that powerful place, then you can even go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it seems like, at least I'm sensing in this time right now, that, oh yeah, I mean, the world is nuts. Oh yeah, by far, it certainly is. But at the same time, there seems to be a lot of, I call it cosmic energy coming in. And there's a lot of reasons why that is happening that we could go into, but it would take a while. So there's a lot more cosmic energy entering our Earth plane right now, or our Earth ball, whatever one wants to call it, our consciousness. And so we're becoming, if we so choose, more powerful in our own wisdom path, our own spiritual journey, and our own ability to create. That really, the new world, you might say, a better world, is ours now if we just earnestly work on ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you. We have to start on ourselves, and the first thing that we need to do is not to get so caught up in, the stuff that we see in the media, because it's not necessarily, well, probably never going to be the truth. So we have to break that cycle of fear and worry, and worrying about the plague and worrying about this and that. So just start with yourself. Like, don't try not to watch the news. I don't. Try not to see horrible images on Facebook. Limit the time that you spend on there. Focus your energies on art, on beautiful things, meditating, spending time in nature, spending time with your family. Focus on all of the good and the beauty that you have, because there's so much of it. There's so much beauty in this world still, but we tend to focus on the bad things that cause fear. And we're not going to be able to awaken properly when everyone is still living in this kind of fear energy. So I would say, yeah, just focus on your family, focus on your partner, your kids, and try not to get so caught up in, all of the horrible things that are happening in the world. Because quite often there's really nothing that we can do about it. But the more that we kind of change our frequencies, and the more that we have this kind of positive frequency, the less those things will happen.
Yeah, I tend to think of it as right now we're living in a time where there's kind of a digital versus an analog life. So you've got digital, you've got your iPhone, then you've got analog, and that's nature. And it's funny, it's nice to be my age, I guess I'm 50 even, where I can remember records, and I can remember when we were kids. We would just run when we were young. We just run out of the house first thing in the morning, and then we'd come back. Like, we're supposed to be home before dark, and our parents didn't worry about us. And
Yeah.
we had this, like, I call it an analog life. We ate bugs. We threw dirt at each other. We,
Yeah.
we had records, and we rode bikes, and we didn't wear helmets on our bikes. And we. I mean, I'm very lucky in that there was nature right there outside the door, and so you grew up with an experience of nature. You grow up seeing seasons, seeing seed pods that have seeds that become new trees. I mean, really, it was an amazing life. And even technology then was, you had a rotary phone that made the neat sound. You kind of twirled it and all. So it seems like I'm finding that there is a need to, at this time, cultivate analog, as I call it. So digital, that's your phone, that's the internet, that's technology, that's all of that. And that's neat. It is a good thing ultimately, but really I'm learning that, man, you got to be healthy, you need to really go like 90% analog, like 10% digital. Like, do your work on the computer, do your work on the phone, do what you do, and it's good to go, and enjoy it and have fun. But at the same time, you really got to go out and climb some trees and listen to records and be with people, and also things like a yoga class, go and do yoga. You know what I mean? There really is
Yeah.
this need to. I'm amazed at how far I've gone into a digital life. When I was born in an analog one, but my life went digital, and now I have to actually deliberately ensure my life is more analog.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah, we do have to make that effort because it's so, being on your phone all the time is like really addictive. But I remember even growing up in Northern Ireland during the 80s, which was a bad, it was quite a hard time because there was a lot of terrorism. Even with the threat of that, I still got up at like 7 o'clock in the morning on the weekends, and I went out and, went up my horse in the countryside, or I met my friends, and we were always outside on our bikes, and our parents didn't seem to worry as much then. But now it's like, you're terrified to let your child go out into the street in case there's a pedophile living there. But yeah, we do need to detox. We need to detox, and that will help our health and our immune systems as well. To turn off the Wi-Fi, go and get some sunlight on your skin. I think one of the worst things that they ever did was to make us fear the sun. Everyone's deficient in vitamin D. The sun is, if you just go out there and you feel it on your face, you feel your energy, your aura is cleansed by that. And, it's so sad that people are too scared to do that without sunscreen.
Yeah, and then sunscreen, has been found to be, well, I won't make any medical claims, of course, on the show for entertainment purposes only, but but some have found it to be not so good for you.
Yeah.
That it's better, like, hey, if you're fair skinned, to get some sun, just don't get too much, use common sense, like we used to have back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah, we also used to have more sunlight back in the day.
Yes.
The sky wasn't obscured by this thick grey cloud that only seems to appear after it's been sprayed with chemtrails.
Yes.
Like the sun is shining, there's not a cloud in the sky, and then a plane flies past. The next thing, it's just grey everywhere. There's no sunlight.
It's a strange thing. Yeah, we experience that too here, of course, and yeah, it's weird how nature has changed, and now there's supposedly new kinds of clouds. That
Yeah.
and you're like, wait a second, new kinds of clouds. Well, wait a second. In the history of the Earth, I don't think there's been different clouds. I think there's just been clouds, right? There's these different ones, and now there's new clouds. That doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's amazing. What the empire gets away with, and definitely chemtrails are a big one. That's a huge topic, and that goes to show I think really the spiritual war that is going on, because that's so deep. I mean, right there, like blocking out the sun. Well, there's endless conjecture as to why, but definitely, some might say that that's our spiritual source and it's being obstructed. Do they want to control climate, etc.? Oh my gosh, that is a huge one. I myself really, there's so much, out there about that, but I really, it seems like I just look at like any diabolical reason somebody can come up with why they're doing that. I'll go, it's good. I buy it. Yeah, I think it's good. I think there's like 100 different horrible reasons why that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just crazy, but hopefully we're coming to the end of that. All of this craziness and nonsense. I have noticed that there's been less chemtrailing recently, so hopefully that stays that way.
I think so. Well, I do think that this thing there is I do believe in that. I do think there is an awakening that is happening, and I think it will continue. And I think sometimes when you're in the heat of battle, you don't really know if you're winning or not. You just know that you're fighting. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think that's kind of where we're at. And, no war is won without a couple lost battles for sure. And, you really can't give up. I mean, I'm not really a big sports fan, but I, have watched some sports, and if you watch sometimes, I'm amazed at how a team will keep fighting even when, man, they're down so many points, there's no chance. Then they turn around and they win, So I look at it, and war might be a sloppy word to use, but definitely I think there is that kind of spiritual war going on. And I guess really the nice thing about it is the way you win, like we've kind of been talking about, is you just work on yourself. You get to that new worth internally. You begin to resonate that light, and then it is created. And really, I hate to sound somewhat selfish, but if you're there, well, whatever, rest of the world, you're at where you're at. I'm there, and I have a firm foundation there. I'm loving the new earth life. I'm loving the new earth people that are part of the fellowship, like you. And I'm like, hey, rest of the world, catch up, because it's so much better over here.
Yes, it is. It is. It's fantastic over here. And we have cookies. We have cookies over here.
We do. Yeah. And they're like gluten free. They're like, they're, almond flour, and
Yes. Yes, they are.
yeah. Oh my gosh. And not only do we have, like, for the carnivores, we have your stack of meat. We also have vegan food. We got it all. It's all here. You're good, It's great. Thomas Sheridan's over here.
Yes. We're all here.
We're all here.
I think that's, there are people out there, and I know because, when I do readings, someone contacts me for a reading, and they tell me that they're feeling lonely because they're awake. They can't find anyone else. So they should, search on the internet for groups, meetup groups, a meditation group, a yoga group. Just find people that are, similar, and then you won't be so lonely. You won't be so isolated. Because I think that people have this terrible fear that they're weird, and, like everyone around them is going to find their views to be ridiculous. But actually, there are way more people like us than we ever thought possible.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say that loneliness is a rite of passage. And I spent, plenty and plenty of years, decades, whatever, lonely. And then that passed, and I look back at that time, and I want to tell myself to savor it more, because it was wonderful, and then once you get to that point where you're not lonely, it's weird, but it's not because you even have a fellowship around you. You're just not lonely anymore. Very hard for me to articulate. I don't know how, really, but if a person is lonely, I would say savor it. What's the big deal?
Yes.
It really is okay. It really is. And you're not alone, and you will get over it. And when you get over it, you'll miss loneliness. You'll be like, damn,
Yeah.
I wish I'd spent more time.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if we look at the myths, all of the ancient myths, the gods will go through the underworld, and they're alone, and they're fighting all of these demons, and everything's dark, and yeah, it's a rite of passage. Don't worry, you'll get out the other side where the sun is shining and the grass is green.
Absolutely, because you find this situation where, the caterpillar becomes the butterfly, and the caterpillar eventually becomes, well, water, goo. It totally disintegrates, then becomes the butterfly. And really, I think it's where we find ourselves when we're in between worlds, you might say, when in the underworld. Like, you realize, who are you? What is your guidance? When you realize that maybe a lot about who you think you are is arbitrary, and then it's a whole other show, and we'll do it in the future. Basically,
Yes.
what is that golden thread? Like what is that? What is it that pulled you? Like, what is that future pull that got you through it all? And that can be our next one that we'll do, because really, I think, yeah, for those people who are lonely, for those people who are struggling, there's a you that is you, but you don't know yet, that is with you. And even when you're not you and you've disintegrated and you become the new you,
Yes.
You were
Yes.
always there.
Yes, it's true. It's true. I mean, for like myself, I personally always struggled, never fit in. I went to like a private school, and I spent a lot of my time staring out of the window because I wasn't interested. And growing up in like a quite a narrow-minded country that's quite dominated by Christianity, I always felt that I was, I didn't fit in, and it was lonely. But I guess in the last 10 years, especially the more that I progress within my astrology career, I meet so many people that are like me. And actually, I'm surrounded by people that are like me for the first time ever, and it's wonderful.
That's perfect. And well, that is a great place to wrap this session up, you know?
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Fiona Aedgar, for being on the show again. I love after that first interview doing follow-ups with people where we just hang out and talk. It's so much easier, and because the ice was already broken long ago. So it's been great having you on. I hope to again, and I think this is a good topic we'll do in the future, that golden thread that has always been guiding you. And with that said, where can people get a hold of you? Because people definitely should get their chart done by you if they have interest.
Sure. My website address is www.fionaedgar.com. That's Aedgar. You can find me on Facebook. Just search for Fiona Aedgar and you'll find my personal and my business page.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and we will talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. It's been lovely. I'll chat to you soon.
Okay, talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
You are listening to Radiant Creators, a collaborative project composed of people whose passion, purpose, and dedication requires forging their own unique path of empowerment and livelihood. A radiant creator isn't making a living, they are living.